Let's remember from our work in visual arithmetic that division is nothing more than grouping. So if we would like to do 10 divided by 2, then that's nothing more than us having 10 different objects. So we'll draw those out. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So 10 divided by 2 has a few different interpretations, all of which are correct. One way that I like to think about it is that it's being divided into groups of 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 10 divided into 2. So we're looking at this 10 objects and we're grouping them off into 2s. Here's 2, there's 2, there's 2, there's 2, and there's 2. So in doing this division into 2s, we have created 5 groups. And now that's one way we could look at it. We could also look at it through the idea of fractions, where what we are doing is simply dividing all of the 10 into 2 different groups. That's another equally fine way. So this would be 10 divided into 2 different groups, which gives us 5 in each group. So it's the same idea whether you want to look at it through one lens or the other. Now what happens if we're working with fractions? We're going to do 10 divided by 1/2. So that's going to be us starting with 10 different objects. And we're going to be dividing each of these into groups that are 1/2 large. Well, right now I don't have any objects that are 1/2 large, so we'll need to start with splitting each of these into halves. And then I can divide them into groups that are 1/2 large. Well, if I go through here, this is a group that would be a half large, and right next to it would be another, and I could continue this down all the way through my diagram. And as you can predict, what we're actually doing is we are doubling the number of things we are focusing on. We started with 10 objects, but when I divided them into groups of 1/2, I got 20 different groups. Now this is very interesting because it gives us insight into how we can play with these numbers. 10 divided into halves is the same thing as us saying that I'm going to take 10 and I'm going to consider 2 times as many things. Now that's very odd that dividing by halves gets us multiplication, but it makes sense when we're looking at it through the lens of groups. By making those groups, we're going to get more groups because I'm considering objects that are smaller than what I started with. So this is where we call the division of fractions. They get a technique that we call multiplying by the reciprocal. And that's a big word, so let's talk about that real quick. So multiplying by the reciprocal is nothing more than saying, if you are dividing by a fraction, we can look at that instead as saying that that is going to cause a grouping where you are going to create many times as much objects, which gets you a larger number. And I think that that's a very interesting concept within the division of fractions, that dividing by something can actually produce a bigger number. It's something that we don't often think of as related to division. Now, when you're dividing fractions amongst each other, it's still no different than any of the drawings we've been creating. So let's look at what 1/3 divided by halves is. 1/3 is going to be one of 3 pieces in a brownie tray. So let's go ahead and take this and section it off and claim one of these 3 pieces. Now, if I'd like to divide this into halves, that means I need to go searching for halves that are of my 1/3. So I could look at dividing each of these in half, and then I can go about dividing them into groups. So this is 1 group, this is 2 groups, this is 3 groups, this is 4 groups, 5 groups, and 6 groups. So what I have created is 2 different groups that are each 1 of the thirds. That's a little bit odd, so let's go and use our numbers to help back this up. I have created 2 groups of thirds, which is 2/3. Now, if we want to look at that through its numbers, then it's easiest if we recall the reciprocal shortcut that we were just talking about, that 1/3 divided into halves is going to create more pieces because I am considering smaller pieces than what I began with. So this is 1/3 divided into halves is going to make many more times as much as I started with. So 1/3 divided by a half is the same as 1/3 times 2/1, because I am doubling each of those pieces by considering groups that are half the size, and that's what gets me 2/3. So 1/3 divided by a half is 2/3, because we are literally taking a picture and we are dividing it into groups using a quantity that is smaller than what we started with.